Well, welcome again to another episode of Hot Takes with Kari and Keelan. This is episode number 8. I am Kari Rae Davis with Kari Sells the City and Keller Williams.
And I'm Keelan Harvey with the Harvey Home Team and Highlands Residential Mortgage.
So, Keelan, I wanted to go ahead and spearhead a conversation regarding the big news that has happened in the real estate business this week regarding the lawsuit that happened in Missouri, a class action lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors. And there's a lot to kind of unpack with this, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you about initially was that, due to this lawsuit, sellers have an opportunity to not pay buyer agent commissions, where in Washington state, we've already been operating under this, this platform, I guess I would say, for probably since 2019 really is when it changed for us. But I want to ask you on the lending side, before I start talking too much detail, if you were a buyer and you had to pay your agent a buyer's agent commission, are you able to wrap that buyer's agent commission into the loan basically when you purchase a home?
So yes and no. So government loans like FHA, VA, USDA, they're just flat out prohibited from paying any real estate commissions at all.
Okay.
Technically, with a conventional loan, you could, but it would have to come out of you'd literally have to pay it out of your pocket as a buyer, or you'd have to finance it into the loan.
Okay.
And so your loan to value would have to support that, right? That as well. But, I really don't think, I'm not too concerned about it, and we'll get into that. And I know you're not either when it's, it's the media scaring the heck out of us. But I do think just the idea alone is very discriminatory against first-time home buyers because, for us at least, a first-time home buyer can get in as little as 3% down.
Right.
And they don't have 3% more to pay an agent, and so I don't think it's fair to them whatsoever. I mean, think about all the things that they'd have to pay. You have to 3% down. Think about that as equity, skin in the game. That's our down payment. And then you have closing costs, and then you have title, you have escrow, you have
Appraisal.
Appraisal. There's just all these
inspection, sewer scope.
And that's not even on. Yeah, that's the all. I mean, there's just so much that has to come. It's not easy already,
right,
to get to a position where you can buy a home. It's a pretty good chunk of change down, and so I think they're doing a huge to specifically our first-time home buyers.
I would agree. It's interesting because I've had so many people call me this week or send me articles about what's going on. And, it's definitely a shakeup in our industry. But one thing that I want to point out about Washington specifically, because I'm licensed in Washington, I'm not licensed in any other states. I've thought about getting licensed in Arizona and Idaho, whatnot. But Washington State in 2019, as I was mentioning earlier, they went ahead and they eliminated the requirement for sellers to have to pay a buyer's agent. Now, that doesn't mean that we're still not getting paid. I mean, 9 times out of 10, when I see commissions, they're at least 2.5% or higher. Sometimes they're a little lower. So in those situations, that's a situation where, the buyer may have to kick in a little bit of money to make up for the gap, or we ask the seller during negotiations to pay that gap if there is a buyer's agency agreement in place. Another thing that they started doing in 2019 is they started advertising in our MLS what the buyer's agent commission would be, where before it wasn't even stated anywhere except on the listing agreement. Even the agent themselves didn't necessarily know what they were getting paid until we got towards the closing process. It wasn't advertised. Another thing they did in 2022, knowing that this was happening, I mean, this lawsuit has been in play for a while, is that they decoupled the commissions. So it used to be, I mean, for the last 30 some years, the listing agent negotiates a commission rate with the seller when they're signing their listing paperwork, and then they would split that commission with the buyer's broker. So there was just one commission split with the buyer's broker, because in our MLS, we are owned by the agents and the brokerages. We're not owned by the National Realtors Association, which is a huge difference with this lawsuit that's happening. but they basically went ahead and decoupled that. So now, as your listing agent, negotiating with your seller, what the terms of the commissions are going to be, the listing agent can have their term, or excuse me, their rate for their services. And then the seller can decide what they would like to choose to pay a buyer's broker, if anything. But as I stated earlier, 9 times out of 10, there are still commissions. There's only been a handful of times I've ever seen 0% commission paid to a buyer's broker. So there's a lot of, I think, anxiety that's around this, but I really think that for us here in Washington, it's not going to be that big of a change, is what I think.
Yeah, I mean, we've been there, done that, and
Right.
you're an amazing agent. I would argue that does anybody that you deal with, Kari, not know about that piece in there about the commissions, and you price the house accordingly, correct?
Well, definitely when you're a listing agent, for sure. I mean, that
Yeah.
is definitely on the forefront of commission conversation, because it's been part of it's just been normal for the seller to pay the commissions. Because you have to remember, like, as it has been in Washington State, when you sell a house, you pay excise tax and you pay commissions for the real estate brokers. And then when you buy a home, you don't pay a commission because you're paying all of these other fees and costs associated with getting into the home. So as a seller, you have a nest egg, you've got proceeds where it's coming out of, like, off the top of the proceeds. But as a buyer, like we're talking about, if you have to come up with 3% down or 5% down plus your closing costs, which you could be looking at $30,000 to $50,000. Well, if you start adding commissions for agents on top of that, it's going to hinder people. So it is something where it's a conversation starter, right? They want us to have this conversation with our buyers to let them know that the laws are currently changing in Washington State.
Mhm.
So there might be a time where a buyer might need to make up the gap, like I mentioned, or we ask the seller to, make up that gap in those commissions. Because starting January 1st, this next year, 2024, Washington state law is going to require us to have a buyer's agency agreement with our buyers, and obviously a listing agent with our sellers. But they're getting very, very particular about the language and the terms, and us having this conversation early on, like almost immediately, to make sure that it's completely understood and out of the way, to know how we as buyer brokers are going to get paid, because there's so much work that goes into these transactions. I mean, you and I work together so closely. It's not just looking online and finding a house and saying, oh, I want to go look at it. Like, once you get started in the process of the inspections, negotiating inspections, finding vendors to fix your home, working with you, making sure the loan's happening in time, making sure the buyer's keeping up with all of the requests that you have with the lender and title. I mean, there's so many moving parts behind it.
Yeah, it's kind of
That,
like the idea of that for sale by owner person, right? Where they think that they're going to do better because then they don't have to. But at the end of the day, you don't market your house correctly. You can run into lawsuits. There's so much that goes on as far as agents are involved to keep a transaction smooth, and for you to get your top dollar for your home. You're
right,
really just shooting yourself in the foot. Just price the home accordingly. And I mean, I feel like the media, just like they always do, they're trying to freak us out, even like, oh my gosh, it's the
right.
end of the world for lenders and end of the world for agents. And we're not even concerned in the slightest. This is like just
It's
yeah, it's a nothing. All this is going to turn into it's going to be a couple change forms and some disclosures, and life is going to go on in real estate as it always does, because it's the best possible way that is fiduciarily beneficial to the buyer and the seller. There's no better
right.
way to do it right now. And homes sell for what they're valued at, and you have professionals that go, and I'm not even concerned about AI, to be honest. Like, the amount of decisions and things that we have to do as a human being, AI is just not going to be able to put it all together in that type of a format. So I'm not shaking in my boots in the slightest. I'm not concerned at all. I think it's just going to be some change of forms and disclosures, and on we go, really,
I
is my
I
thought.
I think that this is going to be a shakeup, but I agree with you. I think that this is just another conversation piece that we have to have with people, and it's going to give, let's say it's going to give buyers more opportunity to interview their competition and make sure they're working with the best person. I mean, there's nothing around that. And that's good. I mean, it is good to have competition among brokers. It's also, I think, going to protect us as brokers if we have a buyer's agency agreement really from the beginning of our business relationship with somebody, so they know that we're committed to them and they're committed to us. Because I know that it's happened to me and it's happened to other agents that I know, that you go out and you show a home and you work and you look at houses and maybe you write an offer for a client and something happens, or maybe it was competitive, it falls apart and you don't win the deal. Because you must realize that we are only here to facilitate the sale. We have no control over how much it costs. So we can just guide you the best that we can. But let's say that deal falls apart and they find out 3 weeks later that same client wrote an offer with another agent. So I think it will kind of protect us too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think people realize the amount of time and effort and what you guys actually make. They think like you just stand around and don't do anything and get paid all this money. It's so
Right.
far, it's like the opposite. Like, these people might not even buy a house for a year or two. The amount of work is insanity that you guys put in, and then you have to pay your broker. You're not just getting all that money. You have
Right.
overhead, you have advertising, you
Well,
have.
I have my little list here of like where commission goes.
Oh, I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Yeah, because
So,
that's not the
really when you think
case.
about it, like we get about a third of our paycheck. So you've got 1% goes to your brokerage because you've got brokerage fees. And then you've got business expenses like MLS membership fees for one. But we're independent contractors. So we're paying all of our own expenses and employment taxes. We're not an employee at all. So we've got license and training, we've got professional dues, continuing education, advertising and printing for our listings, promotions if we rent an office, gas and vehicle maintenance. I know I've been filling my gas tank up like 3 times a week, and that's like at $80 a pop. I mean, it's not just like once a week like most people driving to their office.
Absolutely.
Cell phone and internet, signs, key boxes, staging and cleaning expenses, our health insurance, our car insurance, business insurance. So, I mean, it's just, there's so many things that come out of this commission for us. So I hope that people understand that, yes, you can get online and look at houses online. But when it comes down to the nitty gritty of like getting into a home and like looking at things and having somebody that has a trained eye go in with you to make sure that like the foundation isn't cracked in the wrong direction, or there's not water intrusion, or all of these things you get to be really good at as your realtor. I mean, we have value and we're licensed with the state for a reason. I mean, you wouldn't represent yourself in court. You wouldn't do your own dentistry.
I hope not.
I mean, hopefully not.
Yeah.
But I think that people might actually get a better insight to what kind of services that we provide with all of these conversations that are happening.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's fair and to you guys, and you get enough credit because you can look at houses online, but getting into the game and actually walking through a house, you
Right.
can't replace that. That's experience. Like you
Right.
can't replace the human eye. Your experience, Carrie, and all these years you've been doing this, you see the same things. It's scar tissue that you built up over years and years and years of transactions and having an understanding, and there's no replacement for that.
Well, and it's the same thing with your lender. Like you have to have somebody that's a good lender that knows what's going on and is watching rates like you do, like making sure that you're locking in at the right time and making sure that they're not going to take me down on a wild goose chase, like making sure they're qualified, because there are times where you get people that think that they're going to skirt the rules and think they're just going to, get into contract and figure out their financing later. That's not going to happen. Not in Washington, not anywhere.
Absolutely not. And our position, looking out for our customers, like be honest with your lender, be transparent with your lender. You're
Right.
not going to get one over on them. They're here to help you. Like,
Right.
think about the underwriter as the judge, and we're the lawyer. Same with you on your side, Carrie. Like, it's really just good to be really transparent and help us to help you, because we want to make you successful in buying a home.
Right.
And we're here and we're an advocate for you. Like, it's the whole point.
Right. Well, I just think that everybody should be prepared. So if you're in Washington State and you're looking to buy a house, and buyer agency agreements, it's definitely been around the whole time I've been in real estate, but there's times where I'm not as stringent about signing on with somebody because we're getting along, we're moving forward. And technically, once you sign a contract with somebody, you've committed to working with them. But the rules are going to be changing. So just be prepared that when you start talking to a real estate professional about working with them or buying a home, this conversation is going to come up and commissions will come up. And they may say, you might not have to worry about this at all because the seller is paying my compensation, but there might be a conversation that says that you might have to add a little bit to help make up that gap, or maybe we negotiate with the seller, or maybe this home isn't the one to look at because they're not offering a high enough compensation for either of us, and that way we can move on to a house that maybe would be paying a compensation rate that's acceptable to both parties. So
I agree. And don't let the media freak you out like they're so good at doing, right?
right.
It's not what it's about. Call Kari, talk to her about it specifically. She
Yeah,
can
call
fill you in
me.
on the actual how it actually applies to our world, not
Right.
the crazy doom and gloom that you might be hearing on
Or we're
TV.
never gonna get paid again. It's not gonna happen. Oh,
True,
somebody made an
buddy.
appearance.
Yeah. Well,
Okay,
yeah, we got a
well,
bunch
I think that means it's time for us to wrap up.
for sure. And it
Oh,
comes in all boogery too. That's the worst.
awesome.
Anyhow,
Well, Lyric, thanks for making an appearance to us today.
you say thank you? You got a tank, not a thank.
Oh, a tank.
You
Tank.
say thank you? Oh,
Oh, thanks, honey. Well, okay, well, I think that's the perfect time to end, right?
yeah, for sure.
So, okay, well, Keelan, I appreciate you being here just to be sounding board. I know most of the time, you're giving us information, but I felt like this week we really needed to kind of address this, at least have a conversation started about it. So if anybody else has any opinions or questions that you would like to express, please go ahead and comment below again. We're here to answer questions and we want to hear what you're saying so we can address, anything that you might think about as well here in our weekly videos. So if you want to call me, my number is 206-330-6985.
And mine is 206-321-4941.
Okay, awesome. Well, you boys have a great weekend and I will talk to you again next week.
You say bye-bye?
Okay, bye.